The contractors working the gut renovation of a three-story Victorian on Garrett Street in Wheeling, West Virginia, were pulling old plaster from the second-floor bedroom when a sledgehammer swing produced a sound that was wrong. Not the expected give of plaster over lath, but something hollow and close behind it. A cavity where there should have been nothing. The foreman, a man named Terry Bassett, who had been doing renovation work in Wheeling for 22 years, put his hand flat on the wall and felt the difference in the temperature. Cold air, a sealed space. They opened it carefully. What was behind the false wall, in the space between the original plaster and a secondary framing that had been added later, added deliberately, by someone who understood construction, had been there for 38 years. The renovation crew did not touch it. Terry Bassett took one look, walked out to the front porch, and called the Ohio County Sheriff's Office from the steps while his crew stood in the hallway without speaking. What was in that wall is why you are watching this video. But the story of how it got there and who built the wall, and the detective who spent 14 years of his career and ultimately his badge trying to prove what everyone around him had already decided to ignore. That story begins not in 2024, but in 1986, in the house on Garrett Street, when it was a different kind of place, and with a woman named Rosalind Faye Burgess, who deserved better than what that house gave her. Wheeling, West Virginia, in the mid-1980s, was a city in the difficult middle of a transition it had not chosen. The steel industry that had built the Ohio Valley was contracting, and the towns along the river, Wheeling among them, with its Victorian architecture and its Ohio River working character, were working through what that meant for the people who had organized their lives around it. It was not a defeated place. It was a place that had seen hard times before and had the institutional memory to know that hard times could be weathered, even if the weathering left marks. The Garrett Street house had been a rooming house for 11 years when Rosalind Burgess moved into the second-floor front room in April of 1984. She was 33 years old, recently separated from a husband she had left in Morgantown, employed as a file clerk at the Ohio County Assessor's Office, and in the process of building a life in Wheeling that was entirely her own construction. She had taken the Garrett Street room because it was clean, affordable, and within walking distance of the assessor's office. And she had furnished it with a second-hand armchair, a bookshelf she had assembled herself, and a lamp with a yellow shade that she had bought at a Salvation Army in Charleston, and which cast the kind of warm light she wanted to come home to. She was a practical woman with a private interior life that she shared selectively. She read widely. Her co-workers knew this because she was always carrying a book, and she had a habit of sending handwritten notes to people who had done her a kindness, which was the kind of thing that people remembered about her afterward when they were trying to describe who she was. She had a sister in Columbus, Ohio, named Paulette, with whom she spoke every 2 weeks. She had told Paulette, in their last conversation, that Wheeling felt like the right place to land for a while, that it had a solidity she liked. The rooming house on Garrett Street was operated by a man named Harold Creech, who owned 3 properties in the Elm Grove and North Wheeling neighborhoods in addition to the Garrett Street house, and who managed them with a combination of benign neglect and occasional efficiency that his tenants had learned to work around. He was 51 in 1984, a former building contractor who had transitioned into property management after a back injury, and he was known in the rental community along the Ohio Valley corridor as a landlord who kept his deposits and slow-walked his repairs, but who did not, by any account available to investigators afterward, present himself as threatening or unstable. He had a key to every room in every one of his properties. This was standard. Nobody thought anything of it. On the evening of March 11, 1986, Rosalind Burgess called her sister, Paulette. The call lasted 22 minutes, which Paulette would later confirm from her phone records, and ended normally. No distress, no argument, nothing that registered as a final conversation. Rosalind mentioned she had a library book she needed to return. She said she would call again the following week. She did not call the following week. She never called again. Paulette Burgess called the Garrett Street house on March 19th, when a second missed call had passed without explanation. The landlord, Harold Creech, told her that Rosalind had moved out. He said she had left her key on the kitchen counter and taken her things. He said he hadn't thought to contact anyone because tenants came and went and it wasn't his business where they went to. Paulette called the Ohio County Sheriff's Office on March 21st. Deputy Ronald Cade took the report. He noted that the landlord confirmed the tenant had vacated voluntarily. He noted that there was no sign of a struggle and that the room had been cleaned and re-let to a new tenant. This last fact, Cade noted, had happened with unusual speed, within 4 days of Rosalind's supposed departure. He flagged the speed of the re-let as irregular. He submitted his flag to his supervisor and was told to follow up. By March 28th, the follow-up had established 3 things: that Rosalind had not collected her final paycheck from the Ohio County Assessor's Office, that her personal belongings had not arrived at any address connected to her, and that no one in her known network, not Paulette, not her former husband in Morgantown, not 2 friends from the assessor's office, had heard from her or knew of any plans she had to leave Wheeling. The 4th thing Deputy Cade had established, which he put in his report in a careful, understated sentence that his supervisor would later describe as the source of all the trouble, was that Harold Creech had carried out a renovation of the second-floor front room, specifically a structural modification to the interior wall, in the week following Rosalind's disappearance. Creech said it was deferred maintenance. Creech said he had a building permit. He did not have a building permit. Cade put that in his report too. Ronald Cade was 29 years old in 1986. He had been with the Ohio County Sheriff's Office for 4 years. He was about to spend the next 14 trying to make someone with authority listen to what he had found. The official investigation into Rosalind Burgess's disappearance was conducted by Detective Sergeant Marvin Polk, who was senior to Cade and who had been assigned the case when it was elevated from a welfare check to a missing persons investigation in early April of 1986. Polk interviewed Harold Creech twice. Both times, Creech was composed and helpful and provided explanations for each of Cade's findings that were individually plausible and collectively, to Polk's satisfaction, sufficient. Polk's conclusion, filed in July of 1986, was that Rosalind Burgess had left Wheeling voluntarily and that her failure to contact family was consistent with a pattern of personal withdrawal that Polk noted, on the basis of a single second-hand characterization from a former neighbor who had not known Rosalind well, as typical of someone reorganizing their life. The case was classified as a voluntary disappearance. No criminal investigation was opened against Harold Creech. Deputy Cade objected formally. He wrote a 3-page memo to the sheriff detailing his concerns about the wall modification, the missing permit, the speed of the re-let, and the missing paycheck. He listed them in order. He asked that the case be reopened. The memo was received, acknowledged, and filed. Cade was told that Detective Sergeant Polk's conclusion stood. Harold Creech sold the Garrett Street house in 1989 to a couple who used it as a family home for 11 years. He sold his other 3 properties and retired to a community in southern Ohio in 1991. He died in 2003. He was 69 years old. Ronald Cade requested a review of the Burgess case in 1991. He was told there was nothing to review. He requested it again in 1994 when new forensic protocols had changed what investigators could test for in vacancy evidence. He was told the case was closed. He requested it a third time in 1998, after a national conference on cold case reinvestigation gave him a framework to formally petition for reconsideration. He was told the case was inactive and would remain so. In 2000, Ronald Cade, by then a detective himself and 14 years into his campaign to get someone to open that wall, went to the Wheeling Intelligencer. He gave an interview. He named Harold Creech. He described the wall modification and the missing permit and the 3 formal requests for review that had all been denied. The story ran on a Tuesday. By Friday, Cade had been placed on administrative leave pending a review of whether he had violated departmental protocol by speaking to the press about an inactive case. By the following March, he had been asked to resign. He refused. He was terminated. He was 53 years old and had given 24 years to the Ohio County Sheriff's Office and had been right about every single thing he had ever said about the house on Garrett Street. He just couldn't prove it. Not yet. Every case on this channel is built from sustained attention to the cases and the people that institutions let fall through the cracks. The families who kept asking, the investigators who kept their files, and the truths that waited to be found. If that kind of work matters to you, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get back to Rosalind. The Garrett Street house changed hands twice more after the family who bought it in 1989 sold it in 2000. The second family sold it in 2018 to an investor who held it for 6 years before selling to the development group that commissioned the gut renovation in September 2024. None of the families who had lived in the house in the intervening years had touched the second-floor front bedroom wall. Why would they? It was a wall. It was plaster and lath and framing, and it had been there since they moved in. Terry Bassett's call to the Ohio County Sheriff's Office at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning brought 2 deputies and then a detective and then the Ohio County Prosecutor's investigator and then, eventually, the West Virginia State Police forensic team that processed the sealed space behind the wall over the course of the following 2 days. What was in that space? What had been in that space for 38 years? Confirmed what Ronald Cade had known since March of 1986 and had spent 14 years and his career trying to make someone believe. The identification took 6 weeks, using dental records that Rosalind Burgess's sister Paulette had preserved, had kept specifically because she had never accepted that her sister had left Wheeling voluntarily, and because she had read Ronald Cade's interview in the Wheeling Intelligencer in 2000 and had called him after, and he had told her to keep anything that could identify Rosalind definitively, just in case the day ever came. Paulette kept the dental records in a manila envelope in her filing cabinet in Columbus for 24 years. The identification was confirmed on October 22, 2024. Detective Lieutenant Mara Szymanski of the Ohio County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit called Paulette Burgess at 10:15 in the morning to confirm the identification. She then called Ronald Cade, who was 77 years old and living in retirement in Bridgeport, West Virginia, and who had been watching the news coverage of the Garrett Street discovery for 6 weeks with the particular stillness of a man who had known something for a very long time and was finally watching other people learn it. He answered on the second ring. Szymanski told him what the identification had confirmed. There was a long pause. Then Cade said quietly that it was about time. Harold Creech had died in 2003. There would be no arrest. There would be no trial. The Ohio County Prosecutor's Office issued a formal case closure in November 2024, naming Harold Creech as the person responsible for Rosalind Burgess's death based on the physical evidence, the contemporaneous investigative record, and the forensic analysis of the sealed space. The case was closed as solved. The formal record of the case now includes In its evidentiary appendix, Ronald Cade's 3 formal requests for reinvestigation from 1991, 1994, and 1998, all denied. It includes his 2000 Wheeling Intelligencer interview, which correctly named the suspect and correctly described the physical evidence, and which got him fired. It includes a statement from the Ohio County Sheriff's Office acknowledging that the department's 1986 decision to classify the case as a voluntary disappearance was in error, and that the departmental responses to Cade's subsequent requests for review were inadequate. The statement does not restore his pension, which he lost when he was terminated in 2001 rather than allowed to resign. That matter is, as of this recording, the subject of a separate legal proceeding brought by Cade's attorney in December 2024. Paulette Burgess identified her sister in a formal statement to the Ohio County Prosecutor's Office in November 2024. 38 years after she made the call that started the investigation and was told that Rosalind had simply decided to leave. She was 71 years old. She said she had never believed it. She said she had known from the first week that her sister would not have left without calling. She said the last thing Rosalind had told her was that Wheeling felt like the right place to land for a while. It turned out that was true, in the worst way anyone could imagine. Rosalind Faye Burgess was 35 years old in March of 1986. She had a lamp with a yellow shade from a Salvation Army in Charleston. She sent handwritten notes to people who had done her a kindness. She had a library book she needed to return. She had told her sister that Wheeling had a solidity she liked, and she had meant it as a hopeful thing, the way people mean it when they are building something new from the pieces of a life they are remaking. She had assembled a bookshelf herself, which is a small thing, but which is the kind of small thing that says something true about a person, about willingness and patience, and the belief that a room can be made into something worth coming home to. The lamp with the yellow shade was not in the house on Garrett Street when the wall came down. Nobody knows where it went. Everything else Rosalind owned that was not behind that wall has been in the possession of either Harold Creech's estate or the state of West Virginia since 1986, and its disposition was not tracked in a way that left any record. But Paulette Burgess still has the phone record from March 11, 1986. 22 minutes. Ended normally. A library book mentioned. A promise to call the following week. Paulette has kept that record the same way she kept the dental records. Not because she was certain it would ever matter, but because it was her sister's last conversation, and she was not going to let it become nothing. It mattered. In the end, it mattered. 3 questions before we go. Ronald Cade was fired for naming the right man in 2000, and the wrong of that has not been fully corrected even now. What do we owe the investigators who are right before their institutions are ready to hear it? And what does a wrongful termination cost a community in cases that go cold because the person paying attention was removed? The Ohio County Sheriff's Office issued a statement acknowledging their 1986 error. Is an acknowledgement without restoration sufficient? Or does accountability require something more concrete than words in a document? And what does it mean that Paulette Burgess kept those dental records for 38 years? The same way Rosalind's co-worker remembered the notes she sent, the same way Cade kept his files. That the truth of this case was ultimately held in place by people who had nothing official to sustain them, only the conviction that what they knew was real. Justice came for Rosalind Burgess after 38 years. It came because a contractor swung a sledgehammer and heard the wrong sound, and because a retired detective answered his phone on the second ring, and because a sister in Columbus kept a manila envelope in a filing cabinet for 24 years just in case the day ever came. If you believe that kind of patience deserves to be honored, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More solved cold cases are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.